Hello, in this broadcast, the evening news from the television company Ostankino. The most outstanding event today was the drastic decline in the rate of the ruble in relation to the dollar. Information agencies reported consistently from trading at the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange every hour. By 10 a.m., the ruble had plummeted by more than 500 points, and yet this was not the limit. By end of the trading session, the decline was a full 875 points. The final indicator was 3,926 rubles for 1 American dollar. This is the largest decline of the ruble in the entire history of the exchange. At trading in St. Petersburg, the dollar was even more expensive, exactly 4,000. The difference between volume of notices for sale and purchases reached a record level of $311 million. On possible reasons for the peak situation on the currency exchange, commenting in our program is the Vice Premier of the Government of Russia, the Minister of the Economy, Alexander Shokhin. Several factors led to this dramatic situation. Some of them are connected possibly with certain steps of the government, particularly I have in mind our activities on the securities market, because we managed to convince the population not to invest money into dubious securities. They believed us and began to invest into more reliable securities, which naturally would mean the dollar. The second reason is connected with the fact that when the plummeting of the ruble began, the central bank did not intervene. Later, when we actually realized it was too late, the avalanche had begun. Thirdly, one cannot dismiss from accounts the purely speculative interests of commercial structures, and now we can observe a somewhat paradoxical situation. The notices were posted, the rate of the ruble collapsed, but rubles yet are not being deposited or transacted, even for trading which occurred last week. Didn't the statement of government seem premature that the situation had stabilized, and now market or shadow or other financial structures are proving to you that nothing did stabilize? I don't deny that there is an element of truth in what you say. I also don't exclude that for someone it's expedient now to demonstrate that the government is not in control of the situation. But considering the limited possibilities of these forces, I mean from a purely financial point of view, the rate will decrease. Therefore, we must identify and expose all these speculative, politicized or commercialized interests on the currency market and prevent this current crisis from influencing prices or inflation. The situation on the exchange was immediately reflected at exchange points. Today, the average rate for the purchase of a dollar in exchange points of Moscow was approximately 3,530 rubles. The rate of sale was 4,390 rubles. Many exchange points in Moscow today, in essence, were closed down or were only purchasing currency. Many commercial stores were also closed for reaccounting or inventory, but not only stores and commercial banks. The largest world exchanges recognized that the situation in Moscow had affected the rate of their basic currencies. The plummeting decline in the cost of the ruble in relation to the dollar for the first time evoked a certain reaction on the largest currency exchanges of the world. At trading in Tokyo, the rate of the dollar grew somewhat, but an official representative of the exchange stated that two events now will determine the rate of fluctuations of basic currencies: the outburst of tension in the Persian Gulf and the severe decline of the ruble in Russia. On the London and New York currency exchanges, the rate of the dollar declined somewhat. However, there they also reacted to Black Tuesday in Moscow. The exchange of rubles was not conducted, and one of the experts stated to a correspondent of the agency Rater that, in principle, the West is exterritorial in relation to the ruble. But this week it will have to define its attitude to what is occurring on the interbank currency exchange in Moscow. Overall, Western specialists feel that the current decline of the ruble is of benefit to the Central Bank of Russia, since now the value of its currency reserves has dramatically appreciated. Hence, one can receive more rubles for the dollar and pay the debts of government. Viktor Vladimirovich, now all observers write that the central bank consciously permitted the collapse of the ruble. Is this true? I think that for the central bank there is no sense in creating any sort of panic on the currency exchange. But we saw, since the beginning of the second week in August, clearly the speculative demand has been increasing for currency. The savings of the population, both in savings banks and in commercial banks for the last 7 months, have doubled. Naturally, they're seeking a more lucrative application. Evidently, this trend of the rate with the dramatic increase in the demand for currency caused the central bank to be forced to intervene more and more in the market. And we were forced, with a significant part of our currency reserves, to inject them or let them loose, as they say, to provide for a gradual lowering in the rate of the dollar and not permit any sharp increases. Can you say that the government lost? It's possible, but we're not playing cards here, therefore the term lost is not quite precise. I think that we, in the central bank, were perhaps quite slow in permitting the decrease of the rate of the ruble. Maybe we should have done this a little more actively. The demand for currency artificially is still being increased because of the requests arriving from the CIS countries. The chairman of the government of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, is currently on vacation, but in an interview to RIA News, he stated that the plummeting decline of the rate of the ruble does not reflect the real state of affairs in the Russian economy, and it was precipitated by the provocational actions of certain exchange players who earn giant profits from these transactions. The exchange game, Viktor Chernomyrdin noted, was mounting in the hopes of looser budget policies and departure from rigid control over the monetary sphere. We will not permit this, he noted. As announced by the chairman of the government, in the next few days, several concrete measures will be publicized directed at the continued and tightening of financial policies. As a first reaction of the government and the central bank to today's decline of the dollar, one may perceive the decision of the central bank to increase the interest rates for refinancing from 130 to 170% per annum. Acting Minister of Finance has refuted today rumors about the temporary suspension of trading on the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange. On the 12th of October, the exchange will operate on its usual schedule, and the Central Bank of Russia will participate more actively in trading. This was assured by Sergei Dubinin. According to the press service of government, tomorrow in the government building a press conference will be held dedicated to the economic problems of Russia. The chairman of the State Duma, Ivan Rybkin, feels that the question about the decline of the rate of the ruble evidently will be the topic of discussion at tomorrow's plenary session of the State Duma. The chairman of the lower chamber of parliament avoided a direct answer to the question about possible dismissals or resignations in government, emphasizing that only in Russia there always will be a government. This he told the journalists prior to a meeting between the leadership of the Duma with the president, Boris Yeltsin. Opening in the Kremlin the meeting with the leadership of the State Duma, Boris Yeltsin stated that despite the varied spectrum of opinions and the multi-partisanship of the lower chamber, the parliamentarians, however, managed to enter a legislative rhythm. Boris Yeltsin noted that the meeting with the chairman of the chambers, deputies of the Federal Assembly, have become quite regular. He also added that such meetings are not of a sensational nature, and this is usual work permitting us to gaze into the future, said Boris Yeltsin. And also today's meeting was dedicated to those problems which face Russia today. Prior to the meeting with the president, the heads of the Duma stated that today's severe decline of the ruble is an open challenge made against the government, and the government must properly react to the critical situation on the currency market. The journalists, of course, attempted to extract a prediction on this account from the heads of the Duma. The Duma had asked the Ministry of Finances to talk about this issue, and having had a sense of foreboding yesterday about this, they had asked at yesterday's session of the Duma at 11 a.m. We have a 5 o'clock meeting today of the Duma Council, and there we will confer on this topic. President of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, today accepted the resignation of the government in full membership. Explaining reasons for the dismissal of the government, Nursultan Nazarbayev noted that the cabinet of ministers demonstrated no clear actions to realize the reforms program. Today's session of the cabinet of ministers of Kazakhstan, from beginning to end, was conducted under an increasing barrage of criticism, initiated and conducted by the president, Nursultan Nazarbayev. He chastised the entire government, which, in order to realize its anti-crisis program, the last chance was given in the form of a 15-month carte blanche, but this was not used. And why? Unable to answer this question or to explain or justify seriously the current government was the Prime Minister, Sergei Tereshchenko. Already 3 months have passed, but there have been no changes. Manufacturing continues to decline. Inflation is progressing. Unemployment is growing. Poverty is spreading. In government institutions, as previously, bureaucracy and paper shuffling is flourishing. As a result, the reforms themselves are adrift. Meanwhile, the decrees of the president dedicated to the problems of economic reform are constantly being ignored. Nursultan Nazarbayev, who until now was conducting cosmetic repair in the top government structures by replacing or switching certain members of the cabinet, today decided to do more. According to Interfax, the president of Kazakhstan offered to appoint to the post of the head of government of the republic the first vice premier, Akijan Kajirildin. His candidacy will be submitted for endorsement by the session of Kazakh parliament tomorrow. Today, the session of the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine convened. The President of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, presented to the national deputies a voluminous written report about the basic principles of social and economic policies and addressed the Supreme Soviet with an appeal to the deputies and the public. The preparatory period has ended, said Leonid Kuchma, and the President will now undertake deliberate, decisive measures. In fact, he continued, we must enter a new level of the development of Ukraine, which will either let us survive or finally will cast us into regression and deprive of us the last chances to keep up with the contemporary civilization. The new program of Leonid Kuchma provides for currency, monetary, tax, and other reforms, basic restructuring of rule. The President of Ukraine honestly admitted that he cannot promise immediate improvement in the standard of living for the population. He exhorted also everyone to unity in actions of all political forces. One of the strategic aims of reforms is the course for economic approximation with Russia and the CIS countries. A strategic miscalculation, Leonid Kuchma called the policy of reorientation adopted immediately after declaring independence in foreign economic activity from the east to the west. As a result, the president said, today we have no real sovereignty, but we are satisfied only with superficial attributes of independence. Beginning the examination of the question of the ratification of the oil contract in developing oil sites in the Caspian Shelf was the task of the National Assembly of Azerbaijan today. A report on this issue was issued by the president of the State Oil Company of the Republic, Natik Aliyev. I'll remind you briefly the essence of this deal of the century. 8 Western companies and 1 Russian Lukoil, jointly with an Azerbaijani company, agreed to develop 3 deep-water oil sites in the Caspian Sea. And the natural deposits there are assessed at 511 million tons of oil. Speaking at the meeting, the president of the State Oil Company of the Republic, Natik Aliyev, in detail revealed the significance of the signed contract for the future of Azerbaijan. The parliamentarians who launched discussion of his report underlined the unique attitude of Russia to this agreement. A sense of bewilderment is evoked, said many deputies, when one ministry of Russia, for example the fuel energy sector, supports this contract, the other, that of foreign affairs, is intensely against. Moscow and Tehran have common interests on the Caspian Shelf. This thought was emphasized by Andrei Kozyrev at a meeting with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Mahmoud Vaazi. This means that Moscow and Tehran are not evidently completely satisfied with the agreement of Azerbaijan with the International Consortium on developing Caspian oil sites, which was concluded behind the backs of other Caspian countries. Overall, Russia and Iran are cooperating quite well in the area of regional problems such as the inter-Tajik conflict, the Karabakh regularization, and Bosnia. On the scale of Russia's political relations with the CIS countries, the chairman of the Federative Council of Russia, Vladimir Shumika, placed relations with Armenia in top place. This he stated at a press conference upon the conclusion of his official visit of the delegation of the Federative Council to Armenia. One of the main questions at the Yerevan meetings was the resolution of the Karabakh conflict. I would like to emphasize that with all the significance of such influential international organizations such as the United Nations and the ECSC, the efforts of the institutions of the independent states and Russia could provide more realistic aid in the matter of regularizing the Karabakh problem. And a very important role in the normalization is played by the dialogue process, with the involvement of the three sides of the conflict with the mediation of Russia. Apart from the Karabakh problem, which undoubtedly prevailed in the framework of the visit, they also discussed issues of two-sided Russian-Armenian relations. Special attention was devoted to them during the meeting of Vladimir Shumika with the President of Armenia, Levon Ter-Petrosyan. Soon in Moscow, an agreement will be signed on Russian military bases in Armenia. This, incidentally, is the first agreement with Russia on military bases. And I would like, with satisfaction, to note that moving this idea forward, we also have made our contribution. The beginning of the operation is postponed in the return of Georgian refugees to Abkhazia. The Abkhazian side feels that it is severed because of the Georgian side, because Georgia, on time, could not inform all individuals who were to return. Meanwhile, the Georgian representative stated that the postponement of the launching of the process of repatriation is because of the psychological unreadiness of those returning. It was presumed that on the 11th and 12th of October, to the city Gali, 60 people would return. The majority of forced resettlers who received permission to cross the river Inguri are afraid to return to their permanent residences in such a small group. In their statement, it says that the complicated criminal situation in the Galsk region and the more frequent cases of oppression of ethnic Georgians there make the return of refugees impossible. They stated that they will go to the Galsk region only when the right for return will be received by a greater number of people, which will give further guarantees of safety. Meanwhile, the first level in the operation of the Russian peacekeeping forces in the Kador Gulch on forcing the Georgian armed forces out of Abkhazian territory and locating unreported military technology has been completed. Its preliminary results were announced in the village Azhura by the commander of the Russian peacekeeping forces, General Vasily Yakushev. It was noted that the Georgian armed formations in the Kador Gulch were not recorded, but 10 units of unaccounted for military technology was discovered and also a large storage of ammunition. The peacekeeping units, with the direct involvement of military observers of the sides and the UN, began to annihilate the ammunition supplies. Russian peacekeeping forces, completing the combing of the location, launched air reconnaissance in the parts of the Kador Gulch inaccessible by land. Russia feels that it is impermissible that the situation in the Persian Gulf will go out of control. This was stated by an official representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Grigory Karasin, today. He stated that President Yeltsin sent his envoys to Iraq and Kuwait. According to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, today the ambassador of Iraq in Moscow conveyed an official letter confirming Baghdad's decision to withdraw its troops. In the television address to the American people, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, said that he will not permit Saddam Hussein to challenge the will of the United States and the international community. Today, Iraq stated that it would withdraw its forces from the Kuwaiti border. However, we're interested in facts, not in words. For now, we have not seen evidence that the Iraqi forces are truly pulling away, said Bill Clinton. Newspaper headlines: tens of thousands of American soldiers are going to defend Kuwait. American television with its efficiency and professionalism. The White House position, experts' assessments, films of the recent war in the Persian Gulf. All of this yesterday with such an air of graveness, filled with patriotism and almost victorious, today evidently gave polls the limelight. We've been deceived. Iraq is pulling away its forces from the Kuwait border. This statement, made by an Iraqi representative in the UN, to a great degree changed the situation and the mood in America? And what about the American soldiers who are already arriving in Kuwait? Ships which have already passed the Suez Canal and are approaching the Persian Gulf. Millions of dollars which already have been spent for all this. In the Ministry of Defense, discipline is rigid. One officer who remained anonymous admitted to the press, "It seems we overreacted." Local analysts offer their own hypothetical scenarios, one of which is placing Clinton in an embarrassing situation. Saddam Hussein now will offer him to remove sanctions against Iraq in exchange for recognizing Kuwait's borders. To date, the United States was against lifting any sanctions. Russia, as confirmed to us in an interview several days ago by Andrei Kozyrev, has another position. We would vote for the lifting of a small number of sanctions which were levied for what one may call the disarmament demands of the Security Council. Evidently, the last phone call of Bill Clinton to Boris Yeltsin would no longer be a protocol move and not simply a demonstration of politeness as before. Now Russia, with her weight in the Security Council and influence over Iraq, is necessary as never before as an ally. Or, as they joke here, the former President Carter will have to pack his travel bags again. But if this happens, another failure of Clinton in foreign policy will be clear to everyone. The only candidate for the post of Prime Minister of Estonia is Siim Kallas, the current president of the Bank Estonia. This choice was made by the President of the Republic, Leonard Meri. Siim Kallas is 46 years old by education. He's an economist and has a diploma of Candidate of Sciences. Many observers see the government that he will form as a temporary or transitional, since in March of 1995 the term of the current government assembly will expire and regular parliamentary elections will take place. Today in Russia, few people clearly imagine what is really happening in former Yugoslavia and especially here in Bosnia. A blockade against the Bosnian Serbs has been established and they still refuse the contact group plan. Their stubbornness is beyond comment. The sanctions are in effect for 2 months already. Borders are virtually sealed. But the most humiliating here, they feel, is the full disconnection of telephone and telegraph communications. Relatives even cannot attend burials. For civilians, there is almost no gasoline available. There's a severe shortage of medications. In the zone of division on the Plateau Igman, the UN forces and especially the French contingent are not fulfilling their mission. A few days ago in this zone, 20 kilometers from Sarajevo, a diversionary group of Muslims attacked a small unit of Serbs. 20 people were killed. Of them, 4 were women, nurses. These methods of combat were seen in Bosnia only in the beginning of the war, 1.5 to 2 years ago. The tragedy on Igman gives us the right to feel that the UN peacekeeping forces cannot remain as guarantors of any of our agreements with the Muslims, and possibly in the near future we will have to insist that the UNPROFOR would leave us, because in its presence we have no benefit at all. Through this horrifying example, we were convinced that peacekeeping forces are incapable of supporting peace and cannot guarantee anything. To date, still unfulfilled are agreements on the withdrawal of the Muslim units from the zone of the Plateau Igman, which for a long time is under UN control and should be demilitarized. The events of the last days unfold in the backdrop of gradually passing shock after the Belgrade's levied sanctions against Bosnian Serbs. For now, these sanctions have yielded no results. Today, in the Central Building of Journalists in Moscow, on another anniversary of the disappearance in former Yugoslavia of Ostankiно correspondents Viktor Nagin, Gennady Kurinov, their colleagues honored the memory of all journalists who died or were missing lately. Simultaneously, the Fund in Defense of Glasnost distributed new lists here of victims listed in a book of persecution of journalists and press on the territory of the former USSR in 1993. The Russian Trade and Industrial Chamber and the APR Bank allotted to the families of those who died monetary contributions. Of course, the price which reporters paid for truthful information is incomparable. The representative of the Russian Union of Journalists, honoring the memory of the colleagues on both sides of the October barricades in Moscow and those who died in their service duty, noted the alarming tendency of late manifested in increasing attacks and beatings of journalists in Moscow and St. Petersburg, with the full inaction of authorities. The main thing which we concluded today during the day of commemorating our colleagues is that we cannot permit that journalists in Russia should be intimidated. Laureates of the Nobel Prize in the area of economics for this year are three scientists together. They are the Americans John Harrison, John Nash, and Reinhard Selten from Germany. And so their contributions were noted in innovative analysis in the theory of non-cooperative games. In these games, prevalence is given to strategy built on anticipation of the next move of the rival. Today at the Edwards Air Force Base, the Space Shuttle Endeavour landed. Its crew, with the aid of unique radar apparatus, filmed 6 sites of the Earth's surface, including volcanoes, deserts, and oceans, and as well regions with heightened seismic activity. In Rio de Janeiro, our Latin American correspondents have begun their assignment, Evgenia Fatiev and Yuri Gvozdь. In our program today, their first report. What do we know about Rio de Janeiro and in general about Brazil? The fact that the entrepreneurial Ostap Bender longed with all his soul to visit here, the fact that here everyone, as they say, wears white pants, and apart from that, once a year an astounding carnival is held here. In Brazil itself there is the great Amazon River and a multitude of wild monkeys. Here, no one wears white pants any longer, and the city truly is one of the most beautiful in the world. Ciudad Cheia Maravilhosa, a marvelous city as the Brazilians themselves extol it. It's not marvelous for all its 10 million residents, of course. Almost 1/3 of them live in squalorly conditions in slums, enormous deprived areas ascending the hill slopes throughout the city. The residents of Rio de Janeiro are proud that their city is on the shores of the world's deepest deep-water Gulf Guanabara, in which, as they affirm, one could fit in the ocean-faring ships from the entire world. The bridge joining the banks of the Gulf is the longest in America, almost 15 kilometers. Rio de Janeiro is top in the world according to the number of city buses. And what is Rio de Janeiro without Copacabana and other world-famous beaches? At which now, in October, and this is the height of spring here, it's crowded. And over all of Rio de Janeiro rises the statue of Christ, again the largest in the world. At a height of 30 meters, it's elevated on the summit of a 700-meter mountain, Carcavada. Christ the Redeemer, as if embraces and blesses the entire city. The overview of the events of the day will be concluded with the news of the sports commentator after the ads. A few strokes to the finish, and Andrei Vaskin is the world champion at the distance 100 meters butterfly. Another Andrei Kornev wins the gold medal on the same distance by breaststroke. These events in the Petersburg pool at the World Army Athletes Championships of 12 countries, and where today world champions became the Italians and the second our water polo team. Good evening. And so, big sports games of the Army, I'll note, with the full advantage of the Russian athletes, ended in St. Petersburg today. In Moscow, the soccer players of the Olympic team of Russia modestly won against their guests, San Marino, 3-0. And tomorrow, as the start match, the first of our team again against the San Marino team in the qualifying match of the European Championships. Tomorrow at 18:55, television channel Ostankino offers a broadcast of the match from Luzhniki, where today 22 of our players trained. Among them is the former Spartak and now playing in Spain, Igor Lidyakov, in the program The News. I think that this match is important because the team has come together for the first time and will play together for the first time with a new set of trainers. Of course, San Marino is not the most powerful team in Europe and the world, but to look at the new Russian team will be of interest to everyone. Therefore, we invite everyone to come to Luzhniki. Meanwhile, in the qualifying matches of the European tournament, the French hosted the Romanians. The hosts created many dangerous moments, but the Romanians fought back 0-0 and are in first place in the subdivision. The debut of the disqualified Diego Maradona in a new capacity as trainer of a club team brought him no joy. First of all, according to soccer laws, Argentina has no diplomat trainer, and Maradona has to watch his team from the stands. Secondly, his protégés lost their match in the Argentinian Championship. And we go to the capital of song festivals, the Italian city San Remo. The two-time world champion in auto rally, the Spanish Carlos Sainz, is going for his third gold medal on the Subaru Impreza. Carlos, on another level of world championships, forced all his rivals to swallow dust. Second was Michael Williams of Great Britain. In Egypt, after a series of crashes on the difficult crossings, in one of them is our racer, Sergei Povorov, approaching victory in the Faro Rally as the world motocross champion, the Austrian racer Hans Kindergarter. And in conclusion, about a possible sensation, the star of the National Hockey League, the leading offense player of the Vancouver Canucks, Pavel Bure, again could show up among his native army team, but only on one condition: if today across the ocean the hockey strike does not end.
Добрый вечер.
Good evening. Information from the Oceanic Meteorological Center. District, Karelia, and the northwest parts of the European parts of Russia, the Baltic countries, and the temperatures will read plus 10 to 15. Residents of the Krasnodar, Stavropol, Rims, and Kalmykia, the republics of the northern Caucasus, and